W tym całym dyskursie o depresji, farmakoterapii, skuteczności, zmianach w mózgu i whatever tam jeszcze padło w tym obecnym medialnym zamieszaniu, często zapominamy o tym, że depresja przybiera bardzo różne formy. Bo to nie jest tak, że jednostka chorobowa nie współgra i z naszą osobowością, i z naszym temperamentem, i z naszymi doświadczeniami, i kulturą, w jakiej żyjemy i w której się wychowujemy. Więc chciałabym dziś opowiedzieć o perfekcyjnie ukrytej depresji. Takiej depresji, która przykryta jest maską wzorowej mamy, pracownika, pracowniczki, której na pozór w ogóle nie widać, ale którą bardzo mocno gdzieś tam wewnątrz czuć. I o takiej depresji, która nie zawsze będzie wymagała farmakoterapii, bo nie będzie dawała objawów, które będą wymagały jej wdrożenia, ale to nie oznacza, że cierpienie z jej tytułu jest jakkolwiek mniej dotkliwe. Ja nazywam się Joanna Gutral, jestem psycholożką i psychoterapeutką, a to jest mój podcast Gutral-gada, w którym gadam dziś z Margaret Rutherford, autorką książki Perfekcyjnie, ukryta, depresja. Zapraszam Was do wysłuchania tego odcinka. Hi, Dr. Rutherford. Thank you for being with us here today. We're going to talk about very, very inspiring book that you wrote called Perfectly Hidden Depression. And I must say that when I saw the title for the first time, on one hand, I got really excited, but on the other hand, I was worried that this may be another label that we will put on depression. So to start our conversation, please explain to us what exactly perfectly hidden depression is.
You know, Joanna, you're not the first person. In fact, one of the people that ended Dr. Michael Yapko, who's an international expert on depression, I've been to several of his seminars, and he said the exact same thing that you just said. He said, so you're going to give people another reason to go get medicine. And, I said, no, Michael, that's not my intent at all. So the way I see it, it's not a diagnosis. It's what I call a syndrome, or what we all call syndromes, which are behaviors and beliefs that fall together. You find, when you find one, you find the other, sort of like salt and pepper. And what I did was I tried to describe what I have seen as a clinician. I've been a psychologist for over almost 30 years. And so I had seen these people come in who would declare that they were certainly not depressed. In fact, vehemently tell me they were not depressed. And yet, what I discovered in all of them was that there was not just a hesitance, not just being hesitant, but a real inability to connect with painful emotions or painful experiences. They laughed them off, they discounted them, they denied them. And so while we worked very carefully, because these people are also a little testy and defensive about it, they would admit, yes, I have feelings I never talk about. I compartmentalize them. I shove them away. But I'm so nervous I've never told anybody the things that you seem to, be talking about. And so I labeled it perfectly hidden depression, because to me, it was depression. It's just another presentation of depression that the mental health community can sometimes, or doctors can sometimes, misdiagnose because they're not asking the right questions. They're not listening for the right thing. And unfortunately, what's happening and what's so frightening is that not only as suicide rates go up internationally, but perfectionism rates are going up, and they correlate.
All right. So, people are not really willing to share or to acknowledge that they might be struggling with depression. We have mild depression episode. We have major, and people are like, no, depression, it's really not about me. I'm fine. So what is actually the difference between the perfectly hidden depression and the regular depression? Because when we think about depression, it's more like, someone lying in bed, not being able to move, not being able to have their daily life or maintain their daily chores. What is the difference?
Okay, well, that is the stereotypical view of depression, where you're melancholic and you can't get out of bed and you don't have any energy. And certainly that's part of the criteria, especially for major depression. More moderate depression, you just are feeling low and with self-esteem issues, and you're either eating too much or not enough, or you're wanting to sleep or whatever. But the difference is that those people who will say, yeah, I know that I'm sad, or I've never gotten over being divorced, or I don't like my life, or whatever they're saying, they know that something is wrong. They know that they are not functioning the way they usually would typically function. They're on a medication. They've seen a doctor. They've talked about it. Now, maybe it's what's called high functioning or smiling depression, where they still acknowledge, yes, I have some of those feelings. I'm not going to talk to you about them, but I'm going to slap a smile on my face. But they know, they have recognized that, yes, I am not the person I was last year or 10 years ago or whatever. I am depressed. Someone with perfectly hidden depression, the most classic kind of perfectly hidden depression, does not know that. They are clueless for the main part. They are clueless about the fact that they have been unconsciously, that's why they're clueless, they've been unconsciously compartmentalizing, putting away, shoving away a lot of pain. They have shame that's constantly screaming at them in their head, saying, you don't deserve this, and you better not let anybody see who you really are because you'd get fired, or your mother was right. My mother was right. She told me I'd never amount to anything. And these constant voices of shame that fuel this perfectionism. Whereas more healthy perfectionism is fueled by just a sense of wanting to be fulfilled, enjoying the process of learning and trying and doing your best. There's nothing wrong with that. It's when it gets destructive and when it's fueled by fear and shame that nobody can know who I'm real. I can never let anybody see me as vulnerable. That's perfectly hidden depression. And what has happened is that when people hear that term, Joanna, they tell me it's like something in my gut just went, oh, it has a name. It has, this makes sense to me. I've never known what to call it, but she's right. I cannot be vulnerable. No one knows. I'm so lonely. No one knows who I really am or what I really have to deal with. So the difference between those people that would tell you, oh, I'm not as depressed as it looks like in the commercials or whatever, but they still basically kind of know, yeah, I used to be a lot happier, or I used to feel better about myself, or, whatever it is, but they know they're struggling. People with perfectly hidden depression are often people that don't have a clue. They just know they're feeling incredibly pressured all the time. They stay in their heads. They're overly responsible. They're overly analytical. They have deep empathy for other people, but nobody knows who they are. Nobody. Maybe one person.
When we posted on Facebook and on Instagram some information based on your book, and a lot of people identify with struggling with perfectly hidden depression, what should I do if I actually think that perfectly hidden depression applies to me, applies to my case or someone I know?
Well, for one thing, you've got to look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself a really difficult question, and that is, how bad is it? How lonely am I? Have I thought about hurting myself? Have I thought about dying by my own hand? And if you have, you immediately need to go somewhere, to a therapist, to the doctor you see and you trust, and tell somebody that that's where you are. In fact, you just start where you are and you say, I know that I'm the last person you would ever think was depressed, but I'm telling you, I have not been honest with myself or with you. I have never shared this with anybody. So if there's any danger of you hurting yourself, one of the tragic cases I heard of, it was just about the same time last year. I heard from two women from the state of Florida here in the United States. And one of them had a very good friend kill herself. And she was beautiful. She was successful. She had 3 children. She looked like she had a good marriage. They were well off. And she hung herself. And she was 45 or something like that. And no one knew why. I mean, I imagine all of us know someone at this point that has killed themselves, and people kind of go, what? Her, him? And yet her husband found my book on her bedside table. So she was looking. She was beginning to try to say, what is wrong? What is it? What am I dealing with? Again, I think a huge clue is I'm so lonely. And so, but even if they're not suicidal or have a plan for harm, then again, I think that the first step is to tell someone, a therapist, a friend who lives maybe not in even the same city you do, but you could call them or text them and say, I need to talk to you because I'm living in a way where I am getting more and more despairing or more lonely, and I've got to tell somebody.
But there is the stigma of mental problems, mental illness, at least here in Poland, where people still sometimes believe that asking for help is a symptom of being weak, of not doing good enough with their life. Is it not even more difficult and more dangerous for people who struggle with perfectly hidden depression?
I would answer yes and no to that, because I think the yes is obviously, I'm from the rural South here in the United States. And you betcha, when I first moved here from Dallas, it was like daylight and dark, because in Dallas, a metropolitan area, there was quite an acceptance of going to therapy and talking about your issues. Here, and this was back in 1993, it was nobody talked about it. And so I understand the stigma. But the reason why, and so I would say yes to that question. Yes, it's harder because they've got an extra barrier to get across. But my no to that is that what you may be discounting heavily and denying heavily is the risk to you if you don't do it. There's something else to think about. Your children are watching you. Your children are watching how you deal with life, how perfectionistic you are, how hard you are on yourself, what kinds of things you say to yourself. And they are listening. Your daughters and your sons are listening. And they are going to pick up. If you never talk about your own vulnerability, like, I'll give you an example from my own life. I had a really chaotic time in my 20s. I did about everything you could do to screw up my life. And sure enough, and I talked about it with my son, who's now 26. And when he was in college, he called me and he said, Mom, I've done one of those stupid things that you did. I won't go into, it's his life, so I won't say what it is. And, I realized at that moment, Joanna, that if I had not been vulnerable, if I had not said I really struggled with this, he would never have come to me, ever. So I think that if for no other reason than you want to show your children that it is not wrong to be more vulnerable. Now, I've never been to Poland. I don't know about the zeitgeist there of how much people hide. I know I lived in Switzerland many, many years ago, and I used the term enfermé for them because they were very closed up. They were very hard to get to know. And I don't know about Poland, but I'm hoping that if the book, you said that it got a lot of likes or something when you put it out on Facebook, that says to me that people are beginning to see, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. I'm a therapist because I got good therapy. I have panic disorder. I have panic attacks. And like I said, I made a lot of mistakes in my life. And so getting another opinion, getting another perspective, and one that was objective, not my parents, not my friends, was extremely helpful. I think of therapy often as being a consultant. I'm a consultant on matters of emotion and mental thinking, and all that. I'm a consultant. And so why wouldn't you, go to, if you have a plumbing problem, go to a plumber. And if you have a legal problem, going to a lawyer. If you have an emotional, mental problem, going to a therapist.
In one of the comments, someone joked that perfectly hidden depression has the same acronym as getting a doctoral degree, PhD.
Yes, I'm very aware of that.
And I found it quite funny, but true. actually. Is it possible that people with like big ambitions, need of achievement, can be designated to struggle with it more?
Well, sure. I mean, there's a whole section in the book on constructive versus destructive perfectionism. And that's basically what it is, maladaptive or destructive perfectionism, where, again, it is governing you. The perfectionism is governing you rather than you saying, I really like to strive hard for things. I'm a hard worker. I want to do well. I want to be successful. But when it is something that is keeping you up at night and you can't ever disappoint, and because you're trying to prove these voices wrong, right? And so what I have found as a therapist, Joanna, is that the harder you push something away, be it an emotion or a darker belief or something you struggle with, the harder you push it away, the more it's going to affect you in ways that you don't know, you don't recognize, because you're no longer dealing with it in front of you. You've pushed it away. And so all it does is just kind of come back. And then all of a sudden you can't see it, but it's affecting your life. Whether it's anger, fear, sadness, I don't care what the disappointment, grieving, shame. Shame is huge. If you've been abused in some way and you haven't let yourself work through that and you've pushed it away like you just want to forget about it, that shame is affecting you in ways you don't recognize. Maybe you eat too much. Maybe you eat too little. Maybe you isolate. Maybe you get angry really, really easily. Maybe you are very distrustful. There can be all kinds of things that are happening, and you think, why am I like this? And it's because you have pushed the shame and the guilt and the sadness and the fear and the humiliation away.
When we think about perfectly hidden depression, it's kind of hard to describe how those people function, because for us as an observers, they function just quite good.
Quite well.
But what's going on in the head of person that struggles with perfectly hidden depression?
I can't tell you how many people I've seen, because there have certainly been people that have come to see me because of this. They have read my writings. And let me tell your listeners too, I didn't start out with this idea of this perfectly gelled idea about what I thought perfectly hidden depression was. I literally wrote about what I think I had been learning from my patients. And then I had volunteers from all over the world contact me who had read my stuff and said, I volunteer to anonymously interview with you because I want you to know what this life is really like. So, and all their stories are in the book. But so many of them told me that people actually have come up to them and said, I want to be you. You have the perfect family. You look like you have the greatest job in the world. You always look so happy. You're so successful. How do you do it? How do you keep all those balls in the air? No one is coming up to them and saying, I'm kind of worried about you, unless they see that they never stop. Maybe their spouse might say to them, or their partner might say to them, we've been together for 13 years and I've never seen you cry. Or we've been together for 13 years and when bad things happen, all you do is go to work. You solve the problem. I've never seen what you deal with inwardly. And I feel like I don't even know you. And then they'll say, oh yeah, you know me. I'm just, I just don't cry. I started crying. I'd never stop. And so, all of that is to push away.
How we are getting perfectly hidden depression? Is it that we are born with it, or is some sort of life events or experiences are building it inside of us, and there is some other event that is triggering the symptoms? Mm-hmm. How does it work?
Well, I think a lot of it is trauma-based. One of the things that I talk about in the book, and I decided not to do a chapter on, sources of perfectly hidden depression, because that would have been kind of boring. And so what I did instead was to illustrate through all the stories that are real stories, real people with their identities obviously hidden, of how they got there. Like, for example, and this is graphic, so if your listeners need to be careful or have children listening, be careful with that. One man told me that his father used to line them all up, and he would have a cigarette lighter, and he would hold the cigarette lighter underneath their children's hands until someone said who had done some misdeed. And so he always, in order to get it to stop, he always said, "Dad, I did it." And it would stop. But of course, then he was punished. But he began this strategy of learning, if I take responsibility, then I can keep bad things from happening. I can keep people I love safe. So it could be because you have abuse in your background. It can be because you have, maybe you were the star of your family, and the only time you got attention was when you really were on the top of your game. No one ever said, it's okay if you lose. It's like, no, you got to go out there and win. Maybe you had a parent that really devoted themselves to you. And so you never could really do what you wanted to do. You always felt as if you had to accomplish what they wanted you to accomplish. Maybe you just grew up in a family, maybe this is very common in Poland, where it was not okay if you talked about being sad. It was not okay if you talked about being afraid. You were told, as I was many times, go to your room. You can't be angry. Go to your room. And when you can be nice, you can come back out. That's what I learned. And so, I can remember in my own family saying, it's okay to be angry, and don't hit me, but it's okay to be angry. Anger is you telling me that I've crossed a boundary somehow. So there are lots of pathways to it. But I think it's mainly because as a child, you came up with this strategy to handle your life a certain way in order to protect, in order to succeed, in order to survive emotionally, in order to do whatever. I mean, let's face it, if you had parents who didn't love you well, guess what you decide? Your strategy becomes, I don't need to be loved, because you're not getting it anyway. So your strategy becomes, no, I don't need that. So you just go for success. You just go for the accomplishment, So it can be born in many ways, but what's important is to understand that maybe that strategy helped you survive back then, but it is going to get in your way now. As the woman who killed herself would tell you, she would say to you, yeah, I wish that I had told someone. So
I was thinking, when you were telling all those stories, I was thinking about social media, because in social media, everything seems to be perfect, right? Perfect life, perfect marriages, vacation, careers, kids. And we have pandemic going on right now, and people are encouraged to keep physical distance. But even before we kept scrolling. And I believe that after pandemic, we will keep scrolling and comparing ourselves to others. How does it affect our mood, and especially mood of people who struggles with perfectly hidden depression?
Yes, social media has been, it has become something that can be very, very destructive, rather than, hey, we went on a fun trip and we're going to post some pictures about it because we just want to share it with you. It's become something that you use as a yardstick, or especially the more insecure you are, you use as a yardstick of whether something was valuable, whether you were valuable, whether you made the right choice or the wrong choice. And so, in fact, it's interesting, and this is a bit of an aside, but there's a Netflix film called Social Dilemma, and it's about people who developed things for Facebook and Twitter who actually quit their jobs because they hated what they had, like the guy who invented the like on Facebook, he quit. He quit it all because he can't stand what has happened because of what he created. So social media, as I had a patient tell me one time, she said, I see pictures of children and they're all, dressed alike and they look so sweet. She goes, one of my children is 3 and he poops in the shower all the time, and nobody takes a picture of that. So unless they're a comedian or something. So, I think we don't deal with the reality. And so we're building these perfect looking pictures, and too many people buy into it. Way too many people buy into it.
So is perfectly hidden depression curable? What steps do we need to take to get through that?
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't have written the book had I not thought that it could be managed and you could grow from it and out of it. I myself was a horrible perfectionist. And that's one of the reasons why I had a lot of chaos in my life. And I have really worked to be so much more transparent since then. And I think that it has benefited me greatly to be more transparent. In fact, when I came onto social media, I had the decision to make of how much I was going to talk about my own personal life, my divorces, my history of anorexia, my panic disorder. And I just decided I was going to be completely honest. And I did have a friend or two say, "Are you sure you want to do that?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm very sure I want to do that." So, curable. I think probably it's something to be managed. And where I get my a caveat of mine, I guess is what you would say, is that I think insight is very helpful, and we can be insightful about things, and that you can have these aha experiences. But where you get your real hope is from behavior change, when you can tell you're feeling differently, when you can see your choices changing, when you do something else, with your body that you have learned how to do to help calm yourself down. Those are all things that are changes, and that's where you get hope. And so I hope my book is very hopeful. I've focused on exercises that can be done. There are over 60 of them to help you guide through. Now, I will tell you, a lot of people are telling me they're not doing the exercises. And why is that? Because they only want to understand it. They don't want to risk emotionally. So I'm talking to my publishing company right now about expanding the exercises and really trying to make them easier to do and more approachable to do. We'll see if they'll let me do that or not. Because I don't want it to be just an analytical mental experience for people. I think they need to claim it emotionally before they can actually get better.
So I agree that your book is a kind of a workbook, not just
it is a workbook,
sort of information to read and keep in your mind, just go. You need to get through it emotionally, cognitively. But you describe 5 steps in your book about how to get through perfectly hidden depression. Of course, I want to encourage people to get your book, buy it, and read themselves. But can we give them a little insight? What are the 5 steps?
This was when the publishing company first told me that they wanted a treatment strategy, I froze in my tracks because I just thought, oh my Lord, this is too complicated. But what I really did, Joanna, I just decided, okay, what is my treatment strategy for really anybody who comes in? And if perfectionism is the problem, or if a PTSD is the problem, or if, depression or anxiety, or what do I do? And so that's how I came up with the 5 C's. So the first thing I do is kind of what you and I have been talking about. It's consciousness. It's being objective about yourself. It's saying, is this a problem? And I haven't been labeling it as a problem, but it is a problem. It is not my best friend like I think it is, because I can see how it has left me lonelier, or has left me much more pressured, has left me unhappy in some ways that I cannot let anyone know, that I'm so busy, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to relax. So they first have to become conscious that it is a problem. And I talk a lot about mindfulness and using mindfulness to help you do that. The second stage is commitment, which is also a particularly sticky issue for someone with perfectionism, because you are, again, you're probably trying to change something that you literally fear you'll lose your job if you're not perfectionistic, or you won't get the raise that you would have gotten, or there is a lot of fear in trying to change this. And even the way you go about it will be very perfectionistic at first, because you'll start with something way too hard, and then you'll lose your commitment because it's too hard. You won't ask for help from anyone, especially not one of those weird therapy types. There are lots of mistakes that especially perfectionists can make that have to do with their commitment unraveling. If they relapse and think, oh yeah, I'm still acting perfectionistically. Well, obviously this doesn't work. And so I remember this one woman that came in and she said, I've had 6 sessions and I'm not better yet. And I looked at her and said, well, let's try on another 6 and see how you feel after that. We'll try to step it up, but you're not going to do this perfectly, you know. The third step is I do use a fair amount of cognitive behavioral therapy in my work, not exclusively at all, but it's in there. And this is a chapter that's really, or a stage that's really very much based in cognitive behavioral work, because you're going to look at your rules and your beliefs that are, again, part of that childhood. What did I learn was an absolute, a should, a must, a ought, a have to, must always, must never. And you write those things down, and then you write the beliefs that go along with those things. And some of those beliefs are pretty shocking once you realize that how deeply that goes. Then the next step is to say, is this making my life better today? Is this really helping me, or is it hindering me? And that's a question I can't answer for anyone. They have to just answer that for themselves. But my guess is, if you identify with perfectly hidden depression, a lot of your rules are far too strict, far too rigid. And, you're living in a very tight little box, and you can't ever step out of the box. And so, learning that that's okay, that there's a freedom in so doing that can be really marvelous. The fourth step is more about your emotions. And actually, I didn't put this in the book as much as if I'm going to write, perfectly hidden depression 2, I would definitely include more, not only an emotional connection, but a somatic connection, a connection with your body to release some of that energy through somatic work, like yoga, like meditation, like acupuncture or Tai Chi. But that emotional connection is through what's called a trauma timeline, where you go back very carefully and with a lot of compassion. And if you have severe trauma in your background, you should not do this without a therapist's help. Okay. It's just be too overwhelming. So you go back and you list the things when you were 2 or 3 or 5 or 7, the good things that happened to you that affected you in a way that you can really see, was helpful to you. And then you think about the things that were not, that were damaging, that were hurtful. You don't go back to blame. Here in the United States, people say, oh, people who just want to blame their parents go to therapy. No, that's not it. You acknowledge. You're not blaming anybody. Your parents maybe did the best they could do. Maybe they didn't. But you have to go back and acknowledge what anyone living through that would have felt like, what that child must have felt like. So you go back and you acknowledge with compassion. And then you continue on as long as you want to, and you can begin to see, gosh, if this hadn't happened or gone in this direction, this probably wouldn't have happened, either in a good way or in a damaging way. Then the last setting or stage or direction is what I was talking about before. I talk about all 10 traits of perfectly hidden depression that I've come up with so far. And I challenge everyone to say, make this small change. For example, if you usually people who the only thing they believe is important is what they accomplish, then they don't know how to play, right? They don't know how to play. And so, you begin to sort of say, well, how do I play? And maybe you run through a sprinkler, or maybe you just do nothing for 20 minutes and sit and flip through a magazine. Or, I don't know what that would look like for someone. I remember a woman I worked with who actually would fit this rubric, although I had not written the book yet. And she said that every birthday she gave a party for herself, which was the neighborhood tradition. And it was always a wine and cheese party, and you always invited the neighbors, and the same food was had and the same wine was had. And she said, I hate it. It's boring. I don't want it. I don't even like cheese. And so for her birthday, she invited her, all her neighbors were going, well, when are we coming over? No, not coming over. She put balloons on her own mailbox, which she'd never done for herself. And she and her family went out to a park, and they swung, is that the word? They swung on swings. And she said, it was wonderful. They had a picnic. She said, I finally had a birthday that I wanted, not what other people expected me to have. So it's that kind of thing, those kind of changes in your life that may seem small, but are actually huge.
So that you actually took my last question, and my last question was what you can benefit from, dealing with perfectly hidden depression.
I say in the book, and I believe it so strongly, that the antidote or what cures or heals perfectly hidden depression is self-acceptance. And what I mean by that, I have my own little specific term for or definition of that would be when you believe that your strengths, neither your strengths nor your vulnerabilities define you. Your strengths don't define you. Your vulnerabilities don't define you. You use we were laughing about the 3 letters of PhD, that those are after my name, right? I have a PhD. I also have 3 marriages, one of which has lasted now 31 years, right? I'm not so proud of those. I'm proud of the last one. I'm not so proud of the other 2. They were mistakes. I felt shame about them. I struggled with them, but they are a fact. They're a vulnerability of mine. Okay. I don't think the 3 letters after my name define me any more than those 3 marriages or the 2 first ones. I mean, and nor does the vulnerabilities define me more than the PhD does. So, it's just those are facts about me. And I had to learn, and I can accept that and not shame myself for it. It's not that I never shamed myself. I did. But you can learn to let go of that shame, because shame is not a helpful emotion. It's only helpful if it leads you to a change of behavior. If you carry around shame, you are going to just do other things that you're ashamed of. I learned that the hard way.
I'm not going to lie to our listeners that we're recording it for the second time, because we met the first time.
Because I screwed up.
Oh, come on. It wasn't that bad. I mean, we had some technical problems, and the subject was too important for me to just push it through with a bad sound quality. But I'm so happy that this one actually is going to work out. But last time, the first time when we met and we were talking, you told me that wonderful story about how the perfectly hidden depression started and how it went viral. Can you please tell us how did it started?
Sure, of course. I'll be glad to. I've been blogging since 2012, and I just, every Saturday or something, I'd sit down in my sunroom and think about what I wanted to write about. It was never, planned or anything. And I started thinking about some of these people. This was in 2014. I started thinking about some of these people that I've been talking to you about, these people who would never have admitted to me or even admitted to themselves when they walked in my door that they were depressed. But so I wrote this little blog post, and I just grabbed a term out of the air, the perfectly hidden depressed person. Are you one? And at the time, maybe if I got 40 likes or 5 shares, that was a good post. Well, this went viral. It had thousands of likes, and I don't know how many shares. I don't remember anymore. And then at the time, I was writing for the Huffington Post, and I had forgotten that I had left my email on the bottom of that post. And it was like 2 days later, it was published there. Literally hundreds of emails came to my email. I had no idea what was happening. All of them saying, "This is me. How do you know about this? I've never heard anybody talking about this. It's like you're in my head." I had a local woman tell me, literally, I'm not making this up. Why would I? She said, "I was planning on hurting myself this week, and I read your post, and now I'm going to go home and talk to my family." So I saw all that. I obviously got in touch with her immediately, by the way, since I had her email. And so I saw all that and thought, well, what is this? And realized that I really hadn't studied anything about perfectionism in graduate school. I don't even remember us talking about it. And I discovered Dr. Brene Brown's work but I never discovered anything that linked perfectionism with depression and suicide. She mentions depression in her work, but I think there's much more of a direct link than that. In fact, I know it. And so that's what led to perfectly hidden depression. And I started writing about it, and these volunteers came forward. And then I had a friend who, sure enough, worked for a literary agent. And she said, "Why don't you send me a book proposal and I'll run it by him?" And that was easy. And then it was not easy getting a publisher because nobody knew who I am. I'm in the middle of the United States in this little state called Arkansas. I'm not on either coast. I don't work for a university. I'm just literally a clinician. And the publisher was saying, we think this is a great idea, but nobody knows who you are. And I said, well, that's right. Nobody knows who I am. But one publishing house did take a risk. And they actually made it a much better book than it would have been because I didn't know what the heck I was doing. So New Harbinger published it, and it's a great blessing that they did.
And this is a great publisher because I like their books a lot. And now all of our listeners know who Dr. Margaret Rutherford is and her great book, Perfectly Hidden Depression, Perfekcyjnie, ukryta depresja, published in Poland by wydawnictwo Uniwersytetu Jagiellońskiego. I'm so happy that the book is over here in Poland. Thank you so much for finding time for us and sharing your work. Thank you so much.
It's been even the second time. It's been a pleasure. In fact, probably more than the first time.
Exactly. Well, we might do it like third, fourth time, or we can, maybe
not.
come to Poland.
Maybe I'll just come to Poland.
Exactly. We're waiting.
I'll just come to Poland. And
we're waiting.
I'm vaxxed, as we say here in the United States. I'm vaxxed.
Okay,
so.
It's been recorded. Remember, it's going to be published.
I'd love to come to Poland.
Okay, so we are waiting for you here. Thank you one more time, Margaret.
Thank you, Joanna. Take care.